It is January 1st, 1836, and both the people and the government of France have decided to push through a new idea, a new plan, one in which they will embolden themselves and will push through any and all reforms and policies needed to achieve what they have so desired, the natural borders of France. From the west coast all the way to the River Rhine, they will push through all obstacles needed in order to secure themselves and protect the people, no matter the cost. But first, they knew that they had to secure their borders in order to focus on internal developments. Throughout Europe, they had fairly secure borders, and so there was no concern there as of this moment. However, towards the south, their colony of Algiers had been receiving many reports of pirate attacks, and so the government of France decided to step up and send an ultimatum towards the Kingdom of Algeria, demanding that they pay retribution and stop all attacks at that moment. The government refused, and so war was declared between the French and the Algerians. The Battle of Constantine, which ended on the 3rd of September 1836, was a massacre in which only 1,175 Frenchmen were exchanged for 12,000 Algerian soldiers. A true decisive victory. On the Western Front, the French sent 36,000 men towards the town of Mascara, which is being defended by 23,000 undersupplied and underfed Algerian soldiers. And so, the Battle of Mascara was another resounding French victory, and combined with the capture of Constantine, the Algerian kingdom soon collapsed, and so the war was finished. On the 17th of November 1836, a peace treaty was signed in which the French would annex the western portions of the Algerian kingdom. But at this moment, the French government had realized that their ambitions lied further beyond Europe. You see, the French knew of the many plentiful resources and trade that was present on the African continent, and they knew that they would have to reap those resources in order to enrich the nation and further develop its infrastructure and its military. And so the focus shifted from establishing direct control in Europe to enriching themselves through African colonies. And so their next mission was to establish a stronger foothold in the Mediterranean, starting with Tunisia. On the 26th of April, 1837, the French invaded the Tunisian monarchy. Two offensives began, one consisting of 27,000 men, which pushed towards the western portion, and one consisting of 18,000 men, which committed a naval invasion directly towards the capital. On that same day, news was received in Paris of one of the descendants of Napoleon himself being imprisoned in Switzerland. The war was swift, as on the 15th of October 1837, the Tunisian monarchy capitulated, and so France annexed Tunisia. When the French government waited for the response, for the criticism, for the emboldenment of other European great powers, there was nothing. There was silence. There were rumblings of war between the Netherlands and the United Kingdom and the Russian Empire, one in which the Netherlands would attempt to reconquer the Belgian lands, and so France was free to pursue its own interests. And this culminated on the 24th of April 1838, in which the French declared war on Egypt once again. Their goal was to conquer the Sinai Peninsula, as they had hoped to establish a foothold within the Middle East and in order to improve trade between their current holdings in North Africa and their future holdings in East Africa. They knew what they wanted. The French had sent 47,000 men into the peninsula and began to march towards Cairo. In this moment, however, the Egyptians then launched an offensive into the peninsula's eastern portion. This caught the French by surprise, and so reinforcements were sent. And although this battle waged and continued back and forth for many weeks, the French ultimately ended victorious. The Battle of El Arish ended with 8,000 French casualties and over 10,000 Egyptian casualties. And though it ended in a victory for the French, The exhaustion caused by the war began to mount, and so they made a desperate push towards Cairo in order to end this battle once and for all. Cairo was then captured on the 9th of May. However, no peace invitation was received, and as the French pondered and waited, the Egyptians launched another offensive, this time on Sharm el-Sheikh. A group of only 6,000 Frenchmen was attacked by 13,000 Egyptian soldiers. And although the French began to organize reinforcements to be sent, it was already too late. The Battle of Sharm el-Sheikh was a massacre in which 700 Egyptian men traded their lives for 6,000 Frenchmen. The reason for the loss was quite simple. The French were both outnumbered 2-1, and the Egyptian had 8,400 cavalrymen compared to none for the French. It was bad. And due to the hastiness of the invasion, the division had no general to organize them, and so Ibrahim Basloa quickly made work of the French. This culminated in the Second Battle of Sharm el-Sheikh, in which 25,000 Frenchmen, led by Bernard Pierre, made an offensive against Ibrahim Basloa's 7,000 men. In this case, the French won. However, the exhaustion and the message was written on the wall: end this war or else the French would revolt. People at home were tired, and the news began to change their view and perspective on their government. This had to end now. But the Egyptians weren't letting off any pressure. Despite the fact that they were at war with the Ottomans, they attacked El Arish one more time, sending 12,000 men on the 12th of August, 1839. The French were victorious in defending their position, and now they were able to finally push through a peace treaty in order to end this war. Back home, dissent and disagreements began to arise, particularly within minority political parties in the government. They took this opportunity to strong-arm the majority conservative legislation and push towards newer reforms in order to achieve their own personal visions. One of them was the outlaw of slavery. And so, on the 15th of February 1840, the French government banned slavery within its own territories and other ones of its possession. Though negotiations kept stalling, finally, on the 4th of April 1840, peace was declared within the Middle East, as the French had annexed the Sinai Peninsula. For the next 5 years, things generally went quiet. The French government did not want to push their luck trying to nab more territories. They did not want the attention, and so they focused on internal developments. They began to develop infrastructure, railways, forts throughout their territories and their mainland. However, they took this opportunity to sweep up the rest of the Algerian monarchy, as by this point they were a shadow of their former selves. But they were wrong. The people noticed and were fed up with the government, especially due to its lack of electoral reforms. And so, on the 3rd of August 1845, Jacobin rebels revolted all across the nation. The battles were bloody. Thousands of Frenchmen were slaughtered all across the nation as the government asserted its control and dominance over the people. However, the government simply wasn't strong enough. Estimates report that over 200 rebel brigades were present within the country, and the nation would fall apart if fighting continued to ensue. And so, on the 18th of January, 1846, the French government pushed through wide universal voting, finally appeasing the Jacobin rebels and allowing things to steady themselves. The government made quick work of other groups, such as French reactionaries, and were able to establish stability within the nation. Many had assumed that the French government had learned their lesson and wouldn't push for such an aggressive policy of territorial expansion. However, the people were wrong. In 1847, the French pushed and were able to take over eastern Zanzibar from the Omani Kingdom. And in 1851, the French were able to conquer the kingdom of Atjeh in the East Indies, thereby asserting their control and spheres of influence within both East Africa and Southeast Asia. The government then began to use the profits from its investments in industry and infrastructure from the previous decade in order to fund a large military expansion program. However, they could feel the hot water as their infamy, global infamy, began to arise far too high, and so the government decided to take a pause, 5 to 10 years they told themselves, in order to cool off and wait off any pressure. Fate and history would force their hand.